but we were so much helped. President, everyone talks about Marines Tomodachi operation and how your forces really helped us. It's true. But the decision came from the very top, I know. The President said, we'll do everything we can to help Japan. And State Department, they had 24/7 team for 3 weeks or 4 weeks. And Department of Defense as well, and also Department of Energy worked on 24/7 basis as well. Military, of course, and that was really a big operation in Washington, not only here, as in Japan as well. And I think that's not too much known here in Japan, and that's part of my responsibility too. I should have informed Japanese, so I'm telling this now here, that it was a great operation on the side of the United States government, and also U.S. people, companies, churches, schools, kids. Some of the kids brought us the birthday gift of $20 bill and abandoned that, and at the schools they made this Southern cranes, and there was a huge amount of goodwill through Red Cross and everything. And I think, I'm saying this because after 3 years, we have to remember that we've been helped so much by people around the world, especially Americans. I watch television every day now, and they're talking how people are recalling this great disaster, and still many things have not been done. But I haven't seen too many of the programs referring to how much help we got from around the world. And sometimes I feel that when I was in Washington, I was every year invited by Jewish people to commemorate what Sugihara did. This is the council in Lithuania who wrote more than 7,000 visas, transit visas to through Japan, and because of that, so many Jewish lives were saved. And after 70 years, they still thank Japanese for that. And I think that people should not only remember what they have suffered, but we have to remember what we received as well. So in this occasion of on this occasion of 3/11, I start from this, and I said this was the biggest issue I encountered. Ambassador in Washington has 3 or 4 jobs. One is to explain about Japan, negotiate with the United States on some issues, going around United States, and report to Japan about how the U.S. politics are moving. And also, one of the very important things is to follow world events, Iran, North Korea, China, whatever, and what U.S. is thinking. We have to send the first-hand information. For that, Washington Embassy was so important for us, and I really enjoyed being there as ambassador. But 2 other things that was, especially I should refer, is one was centennial of cherry blossom. That was on 2012, because the first cherry blossoms was given in 1912. And I excavated all the documents from the United States side and Japanese side, and found out who did what, and contributed a column on Washington Post. Because there was so many stories who did what, and I think I was able to straighten it out. Some people say that the biggest, well, the most impressive gift that US people have received from outside, from foreign countries, one Statue of Liberty, and the other is this cherry blossoms. The strong point about this French gift is that it's always there, 52 weeks out of the year. But the strong point about the cherry blossom is that it's in the center of your capital, Washington. And also, it's only 1 week, but you can spread this all around the country. And that's what we did try to do. Of course, you can deliver the little Statue of Liberty to all 50 states, but it doesn't really do a good. So I think we had little advantage over French people on that. We're not trying to compete with them. The third issue that I would encounter was that when I, about a year after I arrived in Washington, the Japanese administration changed, and the opposition party, the Democratic Party, came into power, and they changed the Okinawa policy. Okinawa policy was that they were trying to, the LDP was trying to move this marine base from southern part of Okinawa to northern part of Okinawa. And Prime Minister Hatoyama said, maybe there's a way other places. Let's try to move it out of Okinawa, at least out of Okinawa. And now, you know what happened, so I would not go into what has happened in between the US side and Japanese side. But one thing still lingers in my mind is that at that time, the fall of, or the beginning of 2009 to 2010, many pundits on American side as well as on Japanese side said, hey, this moving of base is a small issue. Japan-US relations are far bigger. So we should not indulge on that small issue. Some top US paper wrote that American government should be more listening to Japanese side on this issue. Now everyone tries to pretend that they totally forget about what they've written 3 years ago. But if you look at what one said, what one wrote 3 years ago, it's very different from what they are now pretending that they have said. I thought that kind of argument was totally wrong, and because of two reasons. One, if you start saying that one issue is small in the total relations or total commitment, relations or security relations could scramble, because if US started saying that Senkaku is a small island, so hey, I'm not going to look at it, we are going to look at big picture, but I'm not going to focus on that. It's going to be almost the end of the alliance. Second, any issue that has gone up to President, Vice President, or Secretary of Defense or Secretary of State, you can't take it, deal it as a small issue. So for that two reasons, I think there were people who tried to mislead. They had a good intention, but misled government as well. Now, I said I was going around 50 states, and when I did exactly 47 states, I met American Embassy staff, and he said, oh, he or she, I forgot, said, oh, you went to 47 states? Our ambassador, John Roos, has done 47 prefectures as well. I said, hey, that takes a little bit different time. And John admitted that too. But I enjoyed going around. And what I tried to do going around was to learn little different sayings, accents in several places. Some people speak with different accents in the United States, and try to pick it up and try to use it in my speeches as well. But the difficulty was, when I get off the airplane, I would catch a cab and ask the cab driver, hey, what's the different accent in the state? And but the difficulty is that he always says, hey, this is the standard English. This is the same in Louisiana or North Dakota or whatever. And, but I really enjoyed going around because this is a huge state and a huge country, and I enjoyed it. And some said, Mr. Fujisaki, you must be very lucky becoming an ambassador in Washington to the United States. And I said, yes, but if I had a choice, maybe I prefer ambassador to Japan of the United States than ambassador of Japan to the United States. And he said, because all the door automatically opens here in Japan. And it doesn't always happen that way, because there's so many countries who are trying to meet secretaries or senators or whatever, and it's such a busy city. But I still thought it was a great honor to be there. Now, I'll discuss a little bit maybe touchy issue. Now, I hear that because of history issues and things like that, there's little schism or whatever between the United States and Japan, and alliances changing. Some even say that it was easier to have a Republican administration. I think that we should not lose the big picture. Japan, United States, Korea, ASEAN, Australia, New Zealand, those countries belong to a same group, which means that these countries prefer a sort of grand status quo. These countries do not want to see the change in power structure in the Pacific. I hear yesterday on the television that Chinese foreign minister said China and US will cooperate to bring about peace and stability in this region. If it means, as some Chinese admirals say, that I don't think he meant that Mr. Wang Ji is such a clever person, but Chinese admiral have once said that, hey, leave Western Pacific to us and we'll control it. I think that's not very popular in this country or in Korea or in ASEAN or Australia. We would like to see China prosperous, but one thing which disturbs me, I'm not a government official, me personally, is that economic growth is directly translated into military strength in that country still. Still, more than 100 million people are under income of $1 a day, and still that is the situation, but military spending is increasing over 10% for more than 20 years, every year. I once asked in Beijing, why do you need that big military? I said, often our cabinet ministers, American cabinet administration people says, we need more transparency in Chinese military. I doubt that discussion. Why? Because it's not the transparency alone what we need. We are bothered by its growing size. Even if it's transparent, that's disturbing. So I made this discussion, and Chinese ex-official said, Fujisaki-san, military spending would grow parallel with the GDP growth. Remember, look at Japan in 1960s, 70s. Your defense spending was growing more than 10%. In some year, it was going up more than 20% a year. And I said, but that's when Japan's military was, I'm sorry, not military defense, was, self-defense was smaller, 1/4 of this size. But Chinese is already number 2 in the world. And do you still need that? So we did not come to any agreement on that. Now, I think we have an issue with China over Senkaku. We don't call it a territorial issue, but there is a issue. Now, I think our officials, maritime patrols are doing well, but the reason that Senkaku has been kept safe was because US has always said that security treaty covers, Article 5 covers the Senkaku. That's the deterrence. And I think we still need US presence there. Now, sometimes, of course there is a history issue, really, but sometimes some people would try to use this as trying to tool to drive a wedge into the alliance. We should be very careful about it. I think Japanese government should be very clear that our policy have not changed. Important thing is that 80% of Japanese, 80% of Americans say they like each other. As for this Japan going to the right, New York Times has written an editorial on Monday last. I think those in Japan, the Americans or foreigners, know that Japanese people have not changed at all. No one wants to go military. So please send a message to your country that Japan is not really changing. I read the New York Times Mr. Thackless article very carefully. This was about 3 weeks ago, titled Nationalistic Talk in Japan Threatens to Chill U.S. Ties. It's very interesting. Many of you may have read it, but it goes like that. I'll just skip read it. This is, some analysts say, this feeling of being held at arm's length may be driving some of the recent criticism of the United States. This is one of the most dangerous moments in US-Japan relations that I have seen, said Takashi Kawakami, an expert on international relations at Takushoku University. Then he says, analysts note that many of the comments are being made by the relatively minor figures and not members of Mr. Abe's cabinet. They also say that Japanese public attitudes remain overwhelmingly favorable toward the United States. Then he goes to say that at the same time, the analysts say frustrations on both sides are real. And then he ends his article by saying, visiting members of Congress added, however, that the American relationship with Japan was still sound enough to be easily fixable. So it goes from here to here to here to here. And I hope that there'll be no misunderstanding on this. I think I should not be speaking too long, so I will move to a Q&A session. But before that, let me tell you two things, two or three things. One, on US-Japan relations, I have always advocated 3 no's. That sounds a bit Chinese, but it's my creation, this 3 no. One is no surprise. Between individuals, there can be pleasant surprise, like a Christmas gift or birthday gift or whatever. But between countries, almost nil. Second, no over-politicization. Some issues that could be dealt low-key should be kept low-key. Third, no take for granted. You see, in marriage, if you marry long enough, husband thinks he's doing a lot. Wife thinks she's running the house, and she's not getting credit. Husband thinks he's not thanked enough, and they both take for granted. Our couple, I'm not talking about my couple, I'm talking about US-Japan, is 60 years, more than 60 years of marriage, and these feelings come up from time to time, so we have to be very considerate on the other side. Two other things I'd like to mention is that I became a American-Japan Society president last July, and it's about 7 months now. it's a very old, 97-year-old. Was established in 1917. The members are not that old, but still very old, and very friendly. Not too many, I should say, very, very careful. Many Japanese senior, very dignified people. I think we need a little bit more, less dignified, younger Americans and women. So I'm trying to encourage more people to join, and I brought some brochures I put on the table. Please pick it up and think about it. Sorry to make propaganda now here. Second propaganda. During 3/11, as you know, 2 Americans lost their life. Two jet students. One from Alaska, one from Virginia. Virginia one was a girl. Taylor Anderson was the name. She loved, well, Japanese things, anime and manga when she was small, and wanted to become a jet. And then she was successful in passing the exam and came to Ishinomaki in Miyagi-Ken, and spent 3 years and engaged with an American boy, and was just going back to Japan in the 5 months after the tsunami, but tsunami swept her life away. One amazing thing is that their father and mother thought that she would be unhappy if father and mother were in dismay. So they said, we're going to carry her torch and continue what she wanted to do, to be a bridge between Japan and the United States. So they donated book corners, invited students from Ishinomaki to United States, or sent them to Japanese English camps, and tried to continue this, what she wanted to do. Usually, if you have such a sad story, maybe you would want to forget about it, or you don't want to think about it every day, but they are facing it, and they're doing this for their daughter. We have just established Taylor Anderson Memorial Fund in Japan. Several impressive members of Japanese society and American societies are members of board. And this organization is to continue what Andersons were doing as individual. By the way, this is the Taylor Anderson's wristband, memorial wristband. We would put on the homepage soon and make brochures as well. So please look it up as well. I'm sorry to have making these announcements as well, but thank you very much for giving the opportunity. Thank
you very much, Mr. Ambassador. Let me take the advantage of the fact that I control the microphone to ask the first question, and afterwards it will become more democratic and let everybody ask questions. You've mentioned briefly defense policy and security issues.
Excuse me. Not try to evade your question, but in American Japan society today, I introduced a new formula. That is not let the speaker speak. I always ask the question from the beginning. like this, because a lot of people tell us everything that we know using PowerPoints and things like that, and I'm not trying to let them do that. So I became an instant interviewer, and I'm asking questions like this. But I try to start from very soft questions, and I hope that he'll do that.
we are. It's very important to differentiate ourselves, and what makes us different from other universities here is we're a barbarian university, and we've survived, so no joy. So you touched security policy. If you look at Europe in the late 70s, after about 10 years of relative détente with the Soviet Union, West Germany was devoting about 4% of its national income to national defense. Italy, which was significantly less rich per capita than the United States at the time, was probably at 2.1 to 2.5%. Today, after 15 years of rising tensions with China, with a general consensus in Japan that China is to some extent a threat. The extent of the threat varies, but I think everybody agrees there's a quote-unquote problem. Whether that's right or wrong, that's another issue. North Korea. Japan is at about 1 to 1.5%, depending on how you define defense spending. Japan is extremely rich, vastly richer by any standard than Italy was in the late 70s, about the same level as West Germany. What would you say to an American congressman or senator who says the United States spends a lot more, Japan is on the front lines, the prime minister goes to Yasukuni against the clear wishes of the US government, but at the same time doesn't spend anything on defense relative to how rich Japan is, and also anybody who's familiar with defense spending knows that Japan gets very little bang for the buck because of the procurement system and a variety of issues. So what would you say to the argument that Japan isn't pulling its weight in the alliance in what after all is the core of the alliance, which is the military aspect?
I hope this was a soft question.
No.
I'm sure
There'll be questions on the history issue afterwards, which I'm sure will make this sound soft.
You see, in defense policies or security policies, you have a offense side and defense side. Offensive weapons and defensive weapons. Offensive weapons, long-range missiles, bombers, aircraft carriers. Japanese are prohibited. We have abandoned that under the Constitution. So we don't have this offensive capability. Even if our self-defense forces are growing, it's defense capability. This year, our defense spending has increased by 2.08%, but this 2% is growth was for personnel. So the hardware was really only this size growth. That is true. But if you have the limitation that you are only able to spend on defensive weapons, there is a limit to. We're #1 in the world for having the anti-submarine P3Cs already. So as long as we limit ourselves to that role, there's a limit. And I think, and I hope that that will not change too. Because in order to try to strike a balance with other countries in the region, I think many of the countries feel that they would rather have this divided role between Japan and the United States. I thank you very much for the very softball question.
Well, the floor is open now.
Ambassador Fujisaki, always appreciate your very good comments and your very good outlay of the U.S.-Japan relations. And thank you for letting me into the U.S.-Japan Association.
I was surprised that you didn't speak English.
I've been working on it, thank you. Actually, thanks to Fujisaki-san's efforts, I'm one of the newest Americans in the U.S.-Japan Association. So thank you. But last question. I've been 20 years in the Air Force and worked very closely with the self-defense forces on these issues. And I'm curious, what can we do now that I'm out? We have all this great crowd. What can we do to help move the U.S.-Japan alliance forward? And not worry about those issues like Yasukuni. How can we keep us so that we're always working together and don't forget that long bond?
Yes.
I hope that's a soft enough question.
Yes. If we come to think about it, this Abe-san's cabinet has issued the national security strategy for the first time last December, established this January National Security Council, is trying to review the interpretation of collective defense, trying to review arms sales policy, and also trying to review the defense guideline. And these are all intended to fortify US-Japan security relations. And I think on that sense, we are on the right track. And I hope that some of these history issues would not try to come into the way. So we are on the, I think, right track on trying to fortify our security relations, especially the strongest relations is, as you know, Navy and Maritime Defense Forces, and next comes the Air Force, and then, but I think these forces have a very good relations, and I hope they'll be the sort of cornerstone of our security alliance. Thank you very much.
Siegfried Hindel, freelancer from Germany. You emphasize the friendship between US and Japan, but I think there is I think last year a book published by a writer called I think Hiyokata, and he's huh?
It's here.
Oh yeah, and he's the co-editor was Prime Minister Abe.
Who's that? Which one? Thank you very much.
Here it is. There's this book, and there's the Nanjing and sex slaves page.
Yes, Prime Minister Abe was a co-editor, and he said, in the writer in his book said, Nanjing was fabricated by the US to cover the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Do you think this helped to improve American-Japanese relations? And what does it mean if a Prime Minister supports co-edited this book?
No, I don't agree with this view. Thank you very much.
Mr. Fujisaki, thank you very much for your lecture. And one question regarding how the Japanese society is moving toward the right side currently. And so it's might be my personal opinion, but I don't think that Japan has been looking at the history with a right attitude so far, and especially about the war. So what I feel like is that the US-Japan relationship has been built not directly, not without the war being considered. So I think it's a very general idea that Germany has looked at the war in a more decent manner compared to Japanese people. So what happened in Japan was all the people who were pro-war before the war has all changed their opinion after the war, and they all became the supporter of peace, and they changed their opinion suddenly. So what I see is dangerous in current Japanese society is that even if we are we are for peace and we want to value the relationship between Japan and US, it could easily flip to the other side because it has not been built upon the experience of our past mistakes.
This, one thing you said is true is that so many people have changed attitudes so abruptly. And it's like in China today, you see so many victims of cultural revolution. No one is on the offensive side. Everyone was the victim.
Yeah.
And it's a bit like that as well. However, I do not, well, there's of course individual views, and my view may not be shared by so many others, but when we talk about the fact that, hey, some people often say that Japanese have not squarely encountered with the history or World War II. What then, I always ask, should we have done if we started to excavate things? There are things that we have to really make we have to be remorse, but at the same time, some people may recall some memories, which, just like what was said about this book, try to dig out where we were on the victim side as well, and we try to do this. Where would that bring us to? So I personally feel that we should, of course, try to not to forget about it, but at the same time, put major weight on forward-looking rather than on the past. It doesn't mean that we should forget about it, we should not squarely meet with the issue, but individual cases are different. German cases, Japanese cases, Italian cases, everything is different. America has its history too. British has their history. So let's not just simply compare and say that we have not done this. I think, of course, maybe we could do more, but we have to be very careful in assessing. Thank you very much.
So, Michael Edward Walsh from SOAS. One of the things you mentioned was that there's a lot of reviews going on right now. There's collective defense, there's procurement. One of the issues that's being reviewed as well is the issue of what's called the gray area security issues and trying to deal with those. So I know one of your responsibilities was to explain the 2003-2004 emergency laws and what Japan could and couldn't do under those laws. And so given what we've seen over the last couple of years with cyber and a lot of other capabilities that are out there, how does Japan defend itself, when you talk about defensive measures and defensive capabilities, against things that aren't clearly defined as armed attack moving forward?
I think that's a very important element, and as you have already noticed that, for example, cyber or space or those new elements are becoming very important element in the discussion between the defense ministers, foreign minister, and their counterparts 2+2, or their director general level meetings. And even if it's not the quote-unquote arms attack, these cyber attacks could be easily translated to that as well. So it's becoming a very important element, I think. Thank you very much, sir.
Ambassador Fujisaki, Frank Packard, businessman. Sometimes America's always asking or expecting Japan to do things. I'd like you to indulge me for a moment in a fantasy. President Obama is coming next month. You know the president. Suppose he were to request a moment with you. What would you wish for America to be toward Japan? Because sometimes I think America has been too protecting Japan before the end of the Cold War, and a lot of the history revisions have come up since 1990, or requests from neighboring countries. And perhaps America has contributed to confusion about how Japan should be. What kind of America would be the best friend of Japan? What would you advise President Obama if he were to ask for your counsel?
So as you rightly said, that's a fantasy, sir. I personally think that, as I have just mentioned, it's important for us to discuss those issues, but I don't think that that issue should be a center focus of discussions. And I don't think that presidents, prime ministers should spend much time on those issues because, one, we have to look more into the future. Second, because some of the issues, very frankly, this is my personal view, are solvable. Some of the issues are not totally solvable. And some of the history issues we have to be very carefully deal with. So, I know that U.S. has made its position known. We already know that, but I don't think the Japanese side or U.S. side should go on and revisit again and again those issues, and I think that's better for the nurturing this very good friendship between Japan and Japanese people and American people. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your personal reflections on your experience. You mentioned that Japan and America had been married for about 60 years, but to me it sort of seems like an arranged marriage, considering marriage started from the occupation. You mentioned in your 3 no's that you said there should be no over-politicization. I'm just wondering if that's a fair comment. I mean, if that's just your personal experience or your personal opinion, or if you think that's just a way to survive in the diplomatic environment. And I feel like, I don't know if the Japan, and if you think that the American side is doing enough to sort of help mediate between Japan's other bad relations, like say with Korea and the comfort women issue. You probably remember the big billboard in the New York or Broadway or something, where the comfort women paid to put up an advertisement, or in the New York Times as well. So I'm just wondering if you think that America's doing enough to help with Japan's sort of relations. Because you sort of say that, you know, one issue is not bigger than another, or, you know, they're all the same, but that's sort of sounds like an easy way to whitewash a lot of other political issues, to just focus on the US-Japan alliance, which is in turn just a security alliance. Thanks.
I do not belong to the government, and I do not know the thinking of the current administration people, but I, for one, as an individual Japanese, thinks that first of all, our relations between us and our neighbors, Korea, China, first have to be dealt by us. And we should try to of course, our good friend's advices are very helpful and to us or to the others, but I think we should be responsible in managing. It may take time. Maybe we cannot do it right away, but I don't think we would come in and try to mediate between Canada and United States, or Canada, United States and Mexico, and I think it's our responsibility first. But of course, that doesn't mean that these councils' advices, friendly actions are not important. It's important, but Japanese should think that it's its own responsibility to manage it, and we hope that. I personally hope that Japanese people will continue to be decent, and our media, some of the magazines try to sort of promote, enhance hate feeling among between our towards our neighbors in Japan, and I think this is absurd act. I think we will remain as neighbors, and we have to be friendly. So we have to somehow manage to sort of live peacefully and try to enhance friendship with our neighbors. And I think it's an important duty of our government and people to do that. Thank you.
My name is Sato, and I belong to the general public of the Japanese society. It's a great honor
Likewise, sir.
great honor that I have this opportunity asking this question. You are the pro of the pro about the foreign diplomacy. So this has been the long wait list that I should ask. What is the most difficult issues and what are the most sensitive issues in the diplomacy to talk about? As a private citizen, I have a very sensitive issue about the history between Japan and the Korean. And I think the difficulties is that I live in the free country, and I'm 67 years old this year. In my education, probably the same age, Mr. Ambassador, probably 3 years or 5 years different. Post-war history wasn't taught at the school. Therefore, I have the freedom to dig out the entire freedom to exercise that things I didn't know. And also Oliver Stone last year published a very interesting story, and there are so many histories. But now we've been accused by New York Times or whatever. English-speaking society is always adopting the Japanese titles to sell better. But are we such a gangsters that we are hated by the other countries?
As you have seen, that I think it's rather sort of difficult to say in front of many foreigners that hey, we are loved. But I think Japan is a country that has won a respect and admiration for being very generous with the development and try to help others and try to be a peaceful member of the international community. I remember that 3 years ago, it was right before 3/11, Newsweek published a comparison of the countries which would be labeled number one or number two in the list of education, the living condition, the security, safety, whatever. I think the smaller countries were on the top of the list, like Finnish or Norwegian, Swedish, Swiss. But for the major countries, Japan was number one, US was number two, and come to think of the fact that we'd been devastated 70 years ago in the war, and we are so far from United States or Europe, and we have established this society. It's something that we could be proud of. So, and I think, as for what you said, I agree that we were not told the post-war history, but at the same time, very frankly, a lot of things we didn't learn from textbook. I think 80% of what we have learned is what we have read through, not in textbooks. So I think every country, people have done that way, and I think it's very difficult to focus. It was difficult to focus on how to strike a right balance of World War II. So it was, in a way, understandable. I hope that in the coming years, it takes time, but in the coming years we will can write these objectively, not too self-righteously or too at the same time degrading ourselves too much as well, the right balance. But thank you very much for mentioning about it. Thank you.
Mr. Ambassador, my name is Tom Dries. I'm general counsel here. And,
you are prohibited to speak.
I want to do a little bit of a take on to a forward-looking issue. As we are a university, I wanted to come back to one of the first things you mentioned about the Nichibei Kyokai, the American-Japan Society, and some of your visions. I think actually we've only spoke about politicized issues until now. The real issues and the real people under attack are not us silver-aged people, but the young people, who the age group from 20 to 30, only 10% have permanent or seishain jobs. The rest are freeder or part-time, or they're hikikomori. They're not getting married. They're not having kids. That's the real challenge to Japan, which is the ultra-aging society that's not replacing itself. But instead of talking about how can we have a young future, a bright future for our kids and our grandchildren, we're talking about defending against another rapidly aging society that doesn't really want to go to war. Can we talk about, I'd love to hear about how we at Temple University or how the Nichibei Kyokai and America can work together to talk about really rejuvenating Japan. Abe's policy, none of his arrows are directed towards revitalizing really the youth or the future of the youth. Do you have any thoughts on that subject?
And by the way, here's my young student too at my South University. Hey, Egmina-san, do you have anything to say? She's a Singaporean, but not Japanese. Do you have any impression of what we have done in university?
Thank you. Well, from my own personal experience, I see a lot of my Japanese friends going overseas on exchanges, and they're really excited about making new friends, and it's more of a cultural exchange more than, I think, like if you were talking about economics or military, I don't really hear that. I hear more of like, well, I want to go overseas to make more friends, and yeah, it's a completely different, I think from what my own experience, like it's completely different from what I expect from probably exchange students. Like it's purely more of cultural than anything else. So that's it.
Thank you very much. I'm now a college professor, and I encounter so many young people like her, and my assistant is there, who's sitting next in front of her, is one of my assistants as well. And I meet regularly these young people. And what I noticed after coming back to Japan is that everyone who's company CEOs or whoever are the big shots have to complain that we are so worried about Japanese youth. They are inward looking. They don't get married. They don't go abroad to study, and They don't start their business like American Silicon Valley people. They're just as hikomori or need or whatever. And I have some different, sort of have a different view in that sense that in this country, everything was so fixed for so many years. We need to, if we are to change, we need to, the government or the big corporations has to give a big push. For example, if you want to go to American college, this is here it's at TUJ, but in Tokyo, so it's easier. But if you want to go to America, for example, first, at the level of English that you're taught at Japanese junior high and high school, you can't really go to study and understand what teachers or other students are saying. Second, how can your parents afford the tuition? Third, if you come back to Japan, can you really get the good job like you have graduated from Japanese college? Fourth, if you manage to get the job, if you go into companies, some companies would say, hey, he speaks good English or Spanish or whatever, so you're going around all the time and you're not coming back to your headquarters. So these inhibitions are there. It's the government, it's the corporations have to change their mindset, and that's what I'm sort of trying to tell government or CEOs of companies. Before you complain, try to give your service to change this society. For example, in order to start some business, it's a lot easier to do it in the United States. But here, if you want to do it, you have to, well, it's changing, but go to bank and borrow huge money, and if you can't succeed, and I think 997 out of 1,000 people would not succeed, so then you have to go to a bankrupt, and there would be a difficulty. So society has to really change in order to really encourage young people to get more adventurous and try to sort of refresh the society. Now, American-Japan society, I have not really come up to that stage yet, but what I thought about American-Japan society is that, hey, if I'm a president of Japan-Croatia society, or Japan-Peru society, or Japan, whatever, Mongolia society, it's a lot easier because you have to come to society to learn about what's going on in that country. But United States, there's McDonald's, there's CNN, there's movies all around, and you don't have to come to American-Japan society. So the only reason that you have benefit in joining is you would meet other people there, Americans, or Japanese who are interested in the United States. So we should make a meeting place, and we're changing the headquarter office to a meeting place. And in several months we're doing that, and we'd like to have, as I said, many younger people and American people, and all of those people here are deemed to be young. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. I'm David Kaplan, a very long-time resident of Tokyo, and I want to know how you judge Prime Minister Abe. He's after 15 months on Japan-U.S. relations now and in the future. Prime Minister Abe, his campaign promise was to build a better relationship with the USA than the DPJ, and then he goes and appoints people like Mr. Yakuta, who's just back from Tehran, where he was feted for saying, quote, America has always used dirty politics. Sorry, not such a tough question.
I think Abe-san has been doing great on economic front, TPP and Abenomics. TPP, we haven't really come to the agreement yet, but he joined the negotiations. And on security front, as I said, a lot of things happening almost at the same time, which has not happened in the last 10 years. So it's very impressive achievements only in a little more than 1 year. This Yasukuni issue was a little unfortunate because that was his conviction, but that was not accepted by many other people. In Japan, there's a divided view as well, I think. But I, as I said, one would not try to focus on those differences. There are differences, of course, but try to focus more on the common values, common goals, common objectives. We share democracy, we share freedom of speech, we like each other, and I think he's the leader of this country, so I think he should be treated accordingly, and I hope that we wouldn't. And as for Hyatta-san, I don't know him. His book is very well selling, so he must be a very good writer, but I have not read the book or I have not seen the movie yet. I don't know, but what, as I said, what he has said about the Hiroshima was whatever was done to cover up Nanjing or whatever. If he said it, I have not read it. It's not my view. I don't think I share that view at all.
Ambassador Fujisaki, it's always a pleasure to hear you speak. I fit the demographics mentioned earlier with the youth engagement question, 20 to 30, and I think a lot of the reason why I'm interested in U.S.-Japan relations is because I am half Japanese, half American. I hold dual citizenship, and my question concerns Japan's policy in not allowing dual citizenship. Why is this the case, and why has the policy not changed?
I'm sorry, I don't know. Really, I have not dealt with those citizenship or consular or issues in my 43 years of diplomacy, and I do not pretend that I know that. It used to be, in a way, stricter. For example, Japanese diplomats were not allowed to marry a foreigner. Or if the other side wants to remain as a foreign citizen, we were not able to do that. But now it's allowed, and the wife or husband can retain their citizenship. These things are changing. As for dual citizenship, it's allowed in many other countries. In Japan, it's not allowed, I know. And I don't know if it's because of loyalty to one country issue or because of some other reasons that I have not known. Is there quite a many people who has dual citizenship up until years of 20? You have to make a decision, is that?
Until 22.
22. And many of your friends are sort of agonizing which to choose.
Well, I certainly am, and I think that a lot of my friends as well. I think that the decision mainly concerns people that want to follow the law. Many people have simply told me, just keep it, don't tell anyone.
Yeah, that's the thing to do.
But I think that it's very easy to break the law, but law holds a certain value in society, and it says something that Japan
policy is to not allow dual citizenship?
It may be changing in years to come, but I really cannot answer you because I don't know the reason. Thank you very much. I'm sorry.
Mr. Ambassador, my name is Byron Siegel. I started my career back in the late 80s in the State Department and then went to USTR in the 90s, almost entirely working on U.S.-Japan relations. I was involved in bilateral trade negotiations under Nikki Cantor and Shani Barshevsky.
So you squeezed us.
That was, yeah, exactly. That was my job, and I'm very proud of it because I think Japan is a much more open economy because of it. And my question to you is, I was waiting to listen to the questions that were asked. We spent an hour and 15 minutes talking about the Senkakus in China and security issues. The title of the speech was U.S.-Japan Relations Now and the Future. And I'd love to hear your views on how we lead together on economic issues, on TPP, on opening up, creating trade, because I believe there's a tremendous opportunity for the U.S. and Japan. Now that our economies are aligned, much more than they were back in the 90s, to actually take the lead in generating growth on a global scale. And I'd love to hear your views on that.
Thank you very much. I think it was a very good decision on the part of Mr. Abe to join the TPP, because if US, Canada, Australia, and many of the ASEAN countries were there and trying to make a new rule for Asia Pacific countries, and if we were not in it, China and the Republic of Korea is not in it, but if they joined, for example, and if we were out, we would have felt that we were totally sort of left alone in that sense. And one more thing is that I was a trade negotiator myself too. In Geneva, I was a WTO negotiator, and I was a deputy foreign minister in charge of economic affairs. What I learned is that you have to be there. No one would represent you. So if there's a negotiation making the rules, and if we are not there, we can't expect that the rule will be very favorable to us. We have to be there to negotiate for us. And if we can't agree, of course, no one would force us to join. Now, as for, you didn't ask, but agricultural products. I thought that we cannot equate ourselves with Singapore or Hong Kong, a country which has a very limited population, totally industrialized. We have 120 million people on this small island. That means we have 40% of US population in California, size of California. A great number of people there. Although it's decreasing, people say, still 120 million. So any government has to be responsible in securing food for that. And that means that we can't open up totally no food production at all. That's not possible, like Singapore or like Hong Kong. Remember that in 1970s, for example, there was a shortage of soybean production in 1970s, I'm sorry. And United States controlled the export of soybeans. I think that was against the WTO rule, but still, because there was very limited production, they were not able to export it. There was panic in this country because we live on shoyu and daizu and miso, and those memories are still there. So there has to be some production. At the same time, We can't say that we're going to produce everything. We are selling automobiles, cars, and cameras and everything, and we can't say that we are going to sell, but our market is closed. There has to be some right balance stroke, and that's exactly what negotiators are doing. I do not know what the negotiation is, the status of negotiations. But last time when the ministers met and didn't agree, I thought, hey, that was as I expected. Usually, in any of the negotiations, in that first round when the very high level meets, they don't come to agreement. If you come to agreement, there'll be a huge focus on which side made what concession and all that. So you have to break up once, and then somehow you would go into detailed negotiations. That's, I think, what has happened. I do. And this is just my sheer guess. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm happy you.
Robert Bijay from Temple. I'm happy you mentioned the soybean embargo, because in the past few weeks we've read that a lot of LDP members have been lamenting the days of the Republicans, and of course it was Richard Nixon who imposed the soybean embargo, not Barack Obama. But I have actually a question which is linked to what my colleague Tom Breeze asked. At the beginning you gave the example of a couple, and you mentioned a husband who has a job outside of the home and a wife who works at home. If we compare Japan to other Asian countries, what we've seen is that in the rest of Asia and Southeast Asia, in Hong Kong, in China, in Taiwan, as well as in Western countries, the percentage of women in management and executive positions has risen rather rapidly. In Japan, it's still extremely low. And we've also noticed, I mean, all of us who work in Tokyo know that foreign-owned companies here have far more Japanese women in managerial and senior positions than Japanese companies. So do you think, when you mentioned this example of the wife not working, working at home, she's probably more of a hard job than working outside, but not having a paid job. Do you think that's something that should continue to be the norm, or do you think it should change? What's your view on this?
I think it should change. I have 2 daughters working, and I hope that they'll be promoted too. And really, I think it's changing rapidly, and I think it should be done that way. And I personally think that, I don't know if it's an affirmative action or whatever, but in some first instance, you need some kick quota or whatever in the, and then you would learn that, hey, that's natural. But in this kind of society, if you just don't try to have any push or kick or whatever, it would move a little too slowly. So I hope that will happen as well. And I think that this government of Abe-san is trying at it at least. Thank you.
Do you think that the succession law should be changed to
Allow
allow female emperor?
the symbolic change?
I didn't hear that.
Do you think that the succession law?
I heard it, but that I don't know. I'm sorry, I can't answer.
Okay. We have time for one more question.
Can you hear me okay?
The bigger mic with its recording system.
Hi, my name is Jacob Vader. I'm a master's student from Georgetown doing research in Tokyo now. And I just wanted to ask if you had any thoughts or advice on how Japan can balance the relationship with China given the strong trade and investment ties and the difficult security aspect. Are you in favor of delinking as much as possible? Or does Japan need to consider one side more than the other? Thank you.
There's a political room and economic room here. This is a little cold now. This is a lot of people were worried that it would cool down a lot, but it did not. And at the present, it's maintaining the sort of room temperature here. we hope that the window between these two rooms will, the warm air or hot air would enter this room and it would warm this up as well. It's a little maybe too wishful thinking, but it's better than 3 years ago when we saw that this cold came into this side, and there was a discussion about rare metal export control and things like that. This is better than that, and I hope that, and there's also a cultural room, cultural exchanges. This could warm up these as well, and I hope that it'll happen, but very frankly, I don't know the situation. I'm just hoping it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I don't know if you'd like to make any comment at the end or general.
Well, I enjoyed being here. Thank you very much for having me, and very good questions. I don't know if I answered all the questions. Very frankly, I'm not in government, as you know, and I'm not that up to date on the discussions in the government, but I try to answer you as sincerely as possible with my very limited knowledge. Thank you very much.
One question, do you consider your remarks on the record or off the record, because we have members of the press here?
Is there, who's the member of the press?
Oh, many. So
Is there anything that it's a bit risky for me? Dangerous? Everyone says no. So then it's okay. Thank you.